panel, and I'm going to introduce them as they're moving up here, because I think it's important for us to move along as quickly as we can. So our first speaker will be Alan Jalen, who has been an education writer for many years, including a 12-year stint with the National Education Association's member magazine, NEA Today. He's a member of the CPS Executive Board and co-author of the report that I hope some of you saw outside, called 20 Years of Education, an evaluation that we have done of where we are now after 20 years. The second speaker will be Raji Rice. He is co-founder and executive director of META, which is a multicultural education and training organization. They do national public interest legal work dedicated to protecting educational rights of language minority, immigrant, and poor children. After more than 30 years, this is his area of expertise. And Jerry Mogul, who is Executive Director of Mass Advocates for Children, which is a nonprofit organization that supports vulnerable children who face significant barriers to educational opportunity. He will be focusing today on special education, his own area of special expertise. And Carlos, where is Carlos Rojas? Is he here yet? No, I don't see him. Okay, I will introduce Carlos when he arrives, and otherwise, let us begin, and please save your questions for after the panel. Thank you.
Well, I was one of the people who worked on the CPS.
Louder.
I'm just stand up. I was one of the people who worked on the CPS report on 20 years of ed reform, and I'm just going to touch some of the highlights. And the slides that I'm going to show are on a handout that's on the table outside if you want to take them home. The central promise that charter schools make is that they will take the same kids as district schools and they will do a better job. They will give them better education, right? They will close achievement gaps, right? So particularly for low-income kids, they will do a better job than the district school kids. So we looked at that. And the first part of that question is louder? Okay, thank you. So the first question to look at is, do the charter schools educate all students? Because some charter schools do have extremely good MCAS scores. There's no question about that. There are charter schools that have mostly low-income kids and MCAS scores that are just as good as schools in rich suburbs where kids have all sorts of educational opportunities that low-income kids normally don't, right? So the question is, who are they educating and who are they not? So this chart, I hope you can see it. This chart shows that they do not educate kids, very many kids, with substantial disabilities. So this compares the Boston district schools with the Boston charter schools in percentage of kids with disabilities that they educate. So this set, the red ones are charter schools, the blue is district schools. This is kids with minor disabilities, so it's full inclusion. These are schools with, these are kids rather, with moderate. Can people see the height, the relative height of these? And this shows that they have almost no kids with substantial disabilities, right? So if you total it up, the district schools have a higher percentage of kids with disabilities, period. But the big difference is not so much in the total percentage, it's in what kinds of kids are in those schools, right? Very few kids with substantial disabilities. Oh, this is going to be even harder for people to... This is about kids with limited or who don't speak English fluently, right? This red dot is the Boston district schools. It's 31%. The little blue dots down here are the Boston charter schools. So you see a lot of them are way down next to zero. There's one huge exception up here. You can see it. That is a new match charter school, which is aimed specifically at kids who come in not speaking English, and they are clearly trying to show that they can do it, and we'll see how that works out. I've been to that school. It's an interesting experiment. So that has to do with who gets there, right? Now we're going to look at who stays there, who stays in the charter schools. Just zip on to the next slide. This slide is taken straight from the pro-charter Credo study, right, which has been cited as proof that charter schools in Massachusetts do better than district schools. What Credo did was to compare kids who were in charter schools with matched kids who were in district schools. And the matching was very complicated, but we don't have to get into that. If the district school kids and the charter school kids had done exactly the same, you would not see any columns, right? They would all be at the zero line. So, at the end of the first year in a charter school, the kids in charter schools do a little bit worse, a little bit worse in English and a little bit better in math. So essentially, there's no real difference here for the first year. In the second year, the charter school kids start doing better, and third and the fourth year. So that was a curious pattern. Why would you see zero, essentially, at the end of 1 year, and then a big rise afterwards? So we sent an email to the Credo researchers, and we got, I think, a straight answer. And this is what they said. This is from one of the Credo researchers, Edward Cremata, and he said that the better performance of the students who were there for 2 or 3 or 4 years, he says, is likely capturing both the value add from the charter school as well as inherent student characteristics that make them more likely to persist in charters. So in other words, the kids who score low did not persist in the second and third and fourth year, right? So that's Credo's explanation for why you see this pattern. So let's look at this persistence question. Here is some of the data on persistence. This is the drop-off in enrollment between 9th grade and 12th grade in Boston's district high schools and Boston's charter high schools. And this is all of the charter high schools added up. Right, so Boston loses 20% of its high school kids between grade 9 and grade 12. The charter schools lose 47%, right? So how does that happen? So part of the explanation, I think, has to do with the extremely strict discipline rules in charter schools. There's very sort of minute control over what kids do, and if you don't comply, then there are consequences, which eventually lead to suspension. And when a kid gets suspended, that is a pretty clear message that the school doesn't think he should be there. So we looked at school by school, what percentage of kids are suspended. These are the schools, this is Massachusetts Live. These are the schools these are schools intended for a regular population, so these are not like special ed schools, that suspend more than 30% of their kids. Now, some of those kids are getting suspended multiple times, right? But 30% of the kids are suspended at least once. And 3 of those are charter schools. You'll notice that 2 of them are not charter schools. And if you go on down the list, you'll find lots of district schools also. But charter schools are heavily overrepresented at the top of the list of schools that suspend a lot of kids. So that's one reason. Another reason I don't have a slide for, but it was explained to me by a teacher at Academy of the Pacific Rim, one of the Boston charter high schools. Because I said to her, how come you lose so many kids? And she said, we're very aware of that, we're concerned about that, we're not happy about that. I should say, I've met quite a few charter school teachers. Every one of them that I've met, is a dedicated, hardworking person trying to do right by their kids. They are every bit as dedicated as the district school teachers that I met. This has nothing to do with, the people who work in these schools. What she explained to me was, she said, we do not push kids out. People say we push kids out. We don't do that. But we do have high standards, very high standards. And if a kid, we give kids every support we can to meet those standards. If the kid does not meet those standards after all of that extra support, we still don't push them out. We say to the kid, but you need to repeat this grade. And she said, and when we tell kids that they need to repeat the grade, usually they transfer because they don't want to repeat the grade. With younger kids, it's embarrassing. They feel like they failed. So then they transfer to district schools because they know that they don't have to repeat the grade at the district schools. So that's a second reason. The third big reason is that charter schools don't backfill, except the legislature made them backfill some certain grades now. But those grades do not include high school. So that means when a kid leaves, right, they don't take somebody in the middle of the year, which makes for a very sort of stable situation. You don't have to teach the new kid, the school routines, the school culture. It's very nice. But meanwhile, every kid who's, any kid can get into a district high school if they're at the right age. So, Tobin can't see that. So I'll have to describe it. So, up until now, we've just been talking about the effect of charter schools on charter school students. There is also a big effect of charter schools on students who never set foot in the charter school, students who go to district schools. And that's what this chart was supposed to be about. I mean, it is supposed to be about, except you can't read it. It shows the cost to Boston district schools of paying for charter schools. And the curve goes like that. It's like a rising curve, and it will rise higher next year because there's a delay in the state formula, so that Boston hasn't yet seen all of the costs of the charter schools that already exist. And if there are more charter schools in Boston, then there will be even more. So you can argue about the funding formula. It's very complicated. The charter school people say that they don't get as much as they should. District school people say that they get way more than they should. But one thing that's clear is that when a school system loses $87 million this year, eventually that's going to lead to school closings. So it contributes to the sort of turmoil in the education of the kids who don't go to charter schools, right? When your school is closed, that's a big deal, right? You're not going to learn anything for a whole while you get moved to another school. Now, it's not that charter schools are the only reason for turmoil in Boston schools or the only reason for closing district schools, but it's a factor. It adds to the problem, even for the kids who have nothing whatsoever to do with charter schools. So to get back to the, to get back to the, Yeah, just don't look at it. To get back to the opening question, do charter schools help all students learn? I think, overall, the evidence is that charter schools help some students learn. They certainly do not help all students learn. And they have very negative effect on the kids who are not there.
Okay, thank you, Alan. Stole a little bit of my opening. That's okay. We didn't court. What can you do? Okay, I'm going to talk. I don't have any slides. I tried to do a really cute slide last night, but couldn't do it. I tried to do flip art on Excel, then into PowerPoint. Couldn't do it. All right. So, charter schools and ELL kids. I am focusing on Boston. As Alan said, 31% of all students in Boston are English language learners. Show the little dots that represent the charter schools. You mentioned, for example, Academy of Pacific Rim. They are 0.2%, 0.2% English language learners, 0.4% at Brooklyn Academy in Roslindale, 0% at Dorchester Collegiate. They're pretty low. A few outliers. You mentioned one that set out to actually serve that population. That's Match up in Jamaica Plain, Deanna Lamb's school over in Brighton, pretty much on City Park. The others aren't. The slide I didn't show you, which I'm so proud of, those city totals kind of obscure what's happening in the neighborhoods. Let us think about East Boston. I hope people know East Boston beyond the airport. There are some charter schools in East Boston. XL1, 6.9%. ELLs, XL2, 7%. Brooklyn, East Boston, 14%. What do the schools in East Boston look like for our regular public schools? And if you know East Boston, you can pretty damn well walk anywhere in East Boston. It is not a very big island. Okay, so down here meaning close to the harbor, we have the McKay at 65% ELL. And near the McKay is the Otis at 66% ELL. Or you could go out to the Guile at 71.75% ELL. The Bradley, up on the Heights, is only 31%. Humana Barnes at 48.59%. And Patrick Kennedy at 66%. So that fact that Excel has two schools running at 7% ELL in a neighborhood in which 60 and 70% of all the kids in the neighborhood are ELL. Okay. That's not okay, but that's the reality of that, right? So when you look at these schools in Dorchester and places at 0%, you say, well, who lives in Dorchester? Who lives in Mattapan? Okay. All ELLs are not the same. Alan showed special needs kids by various categories. There are kids who are English language learners who have been in this country for 1 year, 2 years, who speak and know very, very little English. If you will, beginners. And then there are kids who have been here 5 and 6 years who would test and pretty high language proficiency at transitioning, almost ready to be mainstream. Often the discussion is ELL or not, but there is a spectrum. Boston Public Schools in 2012, 19% of the ELL kids were here 1 year. Now, the way it was reported by the state at the time was here in Massachusetts. I assume a lot of those kids were here in the United States for 1 year, but in any event, they were in Massachusetts schools for 1 year, 19%. I looked at 17 charter schools, those that took any ELLs, and they had 6%, 1/3 of the Boston total. So what I'm telling you is that the charters are not by and large taking ELL kids, and when they do take ELL kids, they are taking the kids with the highest level of English proficiency and not taking the kids with the lowest level of English proficiency who need more help. Okay. Why is this coming to pass? One could guess, but let me start here. Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 71A, Section 89, little I, read. was passed in order for the state to get Race to the Top money. The legislature, to its credit, put in some protections into the charter school law. Those protections say that the Board of Education shall only approve, the word only is only one site twice, shall only approve an application if the applicant has a record of operating at least one school that demonstrates academic success and serves student populations similar to those of the proposed school seeks to serve from the following categories. Then it lists the categories that it has to show similarity to. Free lunch, requires special education, limited English proficiency of similar language proficiency level. Because we sort of thought that that's what was going to happen. So we said to people at the State House, no, it's not enough to say they got to take limited English proficient kids. They got to take them of the same level. So that in Boston, you would be taking about 30% of your kids would be ELL, and about 19% of those would be beginners. Not exactly. The word is similar. Okay. Didn't happen. And we talked to the commissioner, and the commissioner said, well, it's a new law. You know, you don't expect perfection in the first year, or the second year, or the third year. And in the third year, Representative Jeffrey Sanchez, who was part of the folks up in the legislature rather than interested in this, went and testified before the Board of Ed and said, come on, follow the law, follow the letter of the law, follow the spirit of the law. We read these applications from these charter schools, and they're not saying that they ever, let alone serve them well, successfully, that they ever had populations that are similar to that of the Boston schools. They just didn't. If you look at the data that they submit, they'll talk about they have disadvantaged kids, or that they have at-risk kids. They may say that they have Hispanic kids, but they never say that they never serve kids who are beginners in English. They just don't say it. So some of the board members said to the commissioner, is that true? And the commissioner said, trust me, I've read the data. So the board voted with 3 votes to the contrary to approve a whole bunch of charter schools in Boston, including the Excel and Brooks schools that I mentioned. So there we go. I mean, basically there is a problem, and it's not, you know, there's a problem with what the charters are being allowed to do, and the allowing is taking place in Walden, and that's, in my mind, is where this starts. The match school may or may not be a good model of education. I've never been there, but I will say to them, and say not to them, but to their credit, that in their application, they say, right on the front page, we have never dealt with English language learners. It's new to us. We're going to deal with it. We're going to hire and partner with people who really have, and they did. And this is our target, and we're going to do it, and they met it. So last year, folks of the Board of Ed, Department of Ed, not the Board, the Department of Ed, asked me would I come and tell them how can they encourage charter schools to recruit more of these kids. Come on, you're in year 5 here. If one school can do it, or 2 schools can do it, they can all do it if they want to. We suggest that if the schools really were proven providers of success, they can say to parents, hey, you should see what we did with population just like yours over here. No, we can't talk about proven providers. That's something the department does not want to enter into the discussion. We might be able to talk about maybe, you know, advertising in the native language press, or radio. Well, fine. It hasn't worked yet. Now, Alan mentioned the Credo study. The Boston Globe argued that because of the Credo study proved the importance of expanding charters throughout the Commonwealth. If you go to page 28 of the Credo study, there's 2 pages on, so how do the charter schools in Boston do with English language learners? Answer is, for math, they do exactly the same as the regular schools. However, they do a different job. Absolutely, we got to confess it. They do a different job when it comes to teaching English, which is not insignificant if the kids are going to succeed. Because, as Credo said, and I quote, those enrolled in charter schools have significantly lower learning gains in reading than their traditional public school counterparts. So, that leaves me kind of wondering in this conversation, do I want to encourage more parents to send their kids to charter schools where they may not learn English, or they may not learn to read as well as they would if they stayed in the district school, or not? I mean, it's a question. I mean, maybe if the schools were indeed proven providers of successful education and teaching reading to this population, that wouldn't be a problem. Maybe if the law was started. Now, I'm going to take 1 minute, and Jerry and I were talking about, you can't completely let Boston off the hook either. So, we convened today at the Madison Park High School. And at one point in time, about 9 years ago, the Madison Park High School had programs for kids who had interrupted formal education. What am I talking about? Talking about a kid who was tending goats in rural Cape Verde, who didn't go to school. A kid who came from rural Dominican Republic, or came from somewhere in the mountains of Guatemala, or was in a refugee camp in Somalia. Kids who miss school and are overaged and have real literacy issues. At one point, those kids of that nature had programs in Madison Park High School to teach them literacy, to teach them everything else that any other kid needs, and to help them get the kind of training that they wanted if they wanted training in occupational education. And about 8 years ago, all those programs disappeared out of Madison Park High School. To the point that today, if you are a kid of the type I just described, you can't take shops training in Boston. You can't do it. You can't learn anything. Automotive, computers, you name what they do in this building, you can't get it if you're the kid I talk about. Why? Why would that be? I mean, not every kid wants to go to college, necessarily. Some kids want to learn a trade. Why can't they do that? Why would they be shut off? And I didn't plan this. I didn't stack up those books with that projector. But if you look at the side, and I urge you to do this on your way out, if you look at this, did you choose that book for that reason?
No.
All right, somebody did. What it says there, you can't read this right there, but it says MPVHS, Madison Park Vocational High School, MCAS, MCAS. It's on the other side of that one as well. It's about MCAS. Those kids are killers for the MCAS scores. Absolutely. Your CPI, in the jargon, would drop like a lead weight if you took a kid who'd been tending goats in rural Cape Verde and was way behind, because after 1 year in this country, you'd have to test them, and he'd be right at the bottom, and there go your scores. But the point is, it's not just the problem that the former headmaster, my good friend Chuck, did that. It's that the superintendent, in that thing that calls itself a school committee in Boston, allowed it to happen, or didn't know that it was happening and didn't care. So, we can talk about the failure of the charter schools to admit ELLs. We can talk about their failure to admit them equitably in terms of how much help they need, and we can talk about their failure to teach them reading, but we are not sitting in paradise. Thank you.
Good morning. Good morning. So I come to this table not just in my professional role, but
louder, please.
I come to this table not just in my professional role, but also as a Boston parent. How many of you are Boston parents either now or, and I mean Boston parents of kids in BPS schools or other schools? How many of you are Boston parents? Now or previously? Okay, so you know what I'm talking about when I say it's a full-time job, because Boston is a complicated place to educate your child. And so as a Boston parent, I have to say it would be disingenuous for me to suggest otherwise, that I'm a charter school agnostic. My two kids have been in just about every permutation of schools. Been in a district school, been in a pilot school, charter school, exam school, private inclusion school, and well, I'm not done yet. I still have skin in the game. So for me, it's not just not letting Boston off the hook a little bit, I'm not letting Boston off the hook a lot. But in my professional role around charter schools, I was at the same hearing that Roger talked about 3 years ago at the Board of Education, when they were when they were voting new charter schools in, and some of these issues that we're talking about, Alan, and Ed raised, that we're all familiar with in terms of failure of charter schools to educate, to enroll kids with disabilities at the same numbers, at the same types, were true 3 years ago. What was outrageous back then, and what I really begged and pleaded for the Board of Ed to do, to put conditions on their acceptance, was that you had charter schools that were some of the worst offenders were basically asking to clone themselves. And it was a perfect opportunity to say, we're fine, but if you're going to clone yourself, if you're going to expand, that will enable you to create a network so that you can start to do the kinds of things that you say you can't do because you're too small, because it's hard to create substantially separate programs for so many kids. Well, if you're going to now go from 200 kids to 800 kids, you've got to figure out a way to do that. And to my dismay, the board basically said, same thing, trust us, we will bureaucratically address this issue, we're not going to put conditions on it. And that was a lost opportunity. By the same token, at MAC, Mass Advocates for Children, where I'm executive director, we have a long history advocating in the Boston public schools around special ed. That's how we started over 40 years ago. We had a 22-year lawsuit against BPS around special ed. We just had a more recent class action lawsuit just a couple of years ago around early intervention and getting 3-year-olds proper services when they came to Boston schools. We advocate with BPS on individual cases. We advocate with them systemically on autism, transition, inclusion. I'm on the inclusion task force that the school committee has put together. So we are deeply, deeply involved with Boston schools and are deeply aware of the problems in the Boston schools. For example, if I told you that a school said to a parent, I won't name who the parent was, but it said to a parent, well, we really can't take your child in unless your child was able to sit in a room with one teacher and 25 kids and be able to focus. And if your child couldn't do that, then it really wouldn't fit there. Now, you might think that would be like a classic charter school scenario, kind of pushing a kid out, right? No. That's a Boston pilot school. Okay? So it's not just charter. But here let's start with some of the charter issues. And I don't want to repeat what Ed and Alan talked about. I'll just kind of give some flavor to some of the data. Yes, the Commonwealth, and I'll distinguish Commonwealth charters from Commonwealth charters from the in-district charters, because that's where it does start to get confusing in Boston. So to keep things clean, I'll just focus on the data on Commonwealth charters. In the last set of data, Commonwealth charters are about 4 or 5 percentage points lower than BPS. So the disparity is not as great as it is with ELL. With ELL, the disparity is just off the chart. The disparity for special ed is not as great, but again, when you look at the type of disability and the severity, then you start to see the large disparities that your graph shows. So for example, in terms of type of disability, I'm going to take 3 types of disability of kids that might provide more of a challenge and potentially more expensive in providing the kinds of supports and services that are needed. Intellectual or cognitive disability, for example. Boston, it's 11.3% of all kids with special needs, 11.3% have intellectual or cognitive disability. For the Commonwealth charters, 3.3%. So to look at it another way, over 16 Commonwealth charter schools, only 26 kids in those schools have either intellectual or cognitive disabilities. Emotional disability, which very often translates into the kind of behavior problems that, of course, charters are known for pushing out. Boston, the district's 11.8%. The Commonwealth charters are 7.5%. Autism. The district is 6.9%. The charters are 2.2%. 17 kids with autism in the 16 schools. an average of about 1 per school if I can get my Saturday morning math right. So that's the problem that we see in terms of the charters really not taking their fair share. And so what does that mean? The impact on the district then is that you have a higher percentage of kids with disabilities, a higher percentage of kids who have intensive needs, and a higher percentage of kids with more behavior problems because charters are pushing kids out in two ways. They push kids out. One, we've talked about in terms of behavior, in terms of no excuses schools. I went on the website. That's not possible. There's a recruitment. The whole question of charter recruitment is, are they really doing a good job of recruiting, right? And so I went on the website to see how many charter schools even mention special ed. And as a parent, you go, when you're looking, you kind of say, okay, I want to feel welcome if I have to this book. Well, 2 out of the 18 websites even mentioned special ed, even had the word special ed in the architecture, in the drop-down menu. 16 didn't even mention it at all. Special ed is often buried under the student handbook, where it's connected to discipline, because that's what the law is. My favorite one around the no excuses school, my favorite one is that around discipline, for starting with the first day of kindergarten. If your child has a tantrum, then immediate suspension. Well, do you think if I have a child, do you think I'm going to be attracted to that school? No. So that's one way in which, so that's one retention problem. The other retention problem is the law says that students who, if a charter school feels that a student has a severe disability they can't handle, who needs an out-of-district placement, the law says that the sending district is responsible for the financial responsibility for that very expensive out-of-district placement. Well, the problem is when charters don't provide substantially separate classrooms, and that's the one that I didn't mention, that only 5 of the 16 schools even have kids in separate placements. And the highest percentage is 9%. The state rate is 15%. We understand that not all kids can be in inclusive classrooms. We understand that. But charters are not even doing close to that fair share around substantially separate. And one way they get around it is by going, that's almost like a loophole in the law that allows them to say, well, we can't handle this child, we think he needs that placement. Law says set up a team meeting, you invite the sending district, and then you kind of negotiate around, so what is that going to look like? The sending district might say, we don't think this kid needs an out-of-district placement. We have in-district placements for the kid. And so, who's then responsible? The charter school office was going to put together an advisory for the charter schools about how to do that well. And it's so complicated and the law is so unclear, they decided they can't even put an advisory together because there are too many questions. So that's an area that really needs to be explored further, because that's a major loophole, a way that charter schools are able to kind of push kids out, even if they do accept kids who have severe disabilities, or if a kid who has a mild disability, if it gets worse over time and they need to push the kid out, that's the way they can do it, and we have to figure out a way to kind of stop that. I used to think that the problem was autonomous schools. That was one of the structural issues around charter schools that made it easy for them to keep kids out and push kids out. And in fact, I think that's a real problem we need to look at in Boston. I think in Boston, we're on a collision course because Boston has started to do more autonomous schools, whether in-district charters or pilots. And autonomous schools really, it's all about creating a culture. And they try and control their front door, they try and control the back door in a way. The front door in terms of deciding who's allowed in. I mean, there's some pilot schools in Boston that require recommendations from teachers. I don't know if anybody knows that. There's some pilot schools that do that. And controlling the back door. If a kid is not the right fit, how do I kind of get them out? Then I realized that, you know what, it's really not just about autonomous schools, that Boston's problem has been there forever, and it's been a backdoor problem in Boston. And the startling statistic that says it around special ed is that in Boston, for the past how many years, and still today, over 40% of kids with special needs in Boston are in substantially separate classrooms. More than double the state rate, more than double the national rate. That's Boston's shame. And what happens is, in many classrooms, teachers can't handle kids because of behavior, because of learning, and got a team meeting, and they're pushed out to a lab cluster, to McKinley, to many kids with learning disabilities are in subset classrooms, kids with autism. And that's the whole Boston bureaucracy, special ed bureaucracy, is of all these subset classrooms all over. Now, Boston is trying to deal with that. The Inclusion Task Force that I'm on is trying to deal with that. It's really hard. It's really hard. And there's like two types of inclusion. And this is where the charters, I think, don't really get it. Charters say, well, we do inclusion. That's how we educate our kids, and we do it the right way. But what they're really talking about is they're talking about mainstreaming kids in that kids have to fit into their model. And there are thousands of kids in Boston who have the classification of inclusion as a placement, or in the same setting. They're technically included because of the percentage of time they spend in the classroom. But they have to fit in, and if they don't fit in, over time, they're either going to end up in a subset classroom or they're going to drop out or something's going to happen. The inclusion that we're trying to do in Boston is the same kind of inclusion that needs to happen in these autonomous schools. And that is inclusion that really talks about educating the whole child, that is welcoming, that differentiates instruction, that talks about universal learning design, that treats kids developmentally, understands kids make mistakes. You can't kick them out of school or suspend them every time they sneeze or throw a spitball. That kind of inclusion is really hard to do. It's culture change. There are some charter schools that get it right, other parts of the state, maybe even Boston, I don't know, and there are some in Boston. But it's a big job. It's a big job for the district schools. It's a big job for charter schools. And that's the direction we need to kind of figure out how to do it. And I'll finish up here. How do we do that? We can try it through legislation. There's a regulatory path that we continue to work with the charter school office at the state level, which I think is getting a little stronger now. And Boston has a compact between the district and the charters where they're starting to work together. And perhaps that's a place where we could also get the charters and the Boston to learn from each other and to try and do inclusion better. So, thank you.